All right, welcome in everyone. We've got the game of the year on tap this weekend. Alabama, Georgia, under the lights, in between the hedges. I'll tell you what, this isn't just another game. It's a defining moment in each of these teams' seasons. We got Ty Simpson headed into his second road start. And it's not just any road start. This is Sanford Stadium, potentially a blackout. Loud environment. Georgia's riding a 33 home game win streak. Got Kirby Smart on the other side. Kirby's beaten Alabama once in his time at Georgia. So we don't know. Got Jam Miller and Tim Kennan returning. And that could be the exact shot of toughness and identity this Crimson Tide team is looking for. We're talking X factors. We're talking about the trenches, where this thing will ultimately be won or lost this Saturday. We'll get into what Alabama's defense has to do, some of your key players and predictions of what they need to do to walk out of Athens with a win. So, in the end, I'm going to give you all the details, all of my opinions, and what I'm thinking for this Saturday in Athens. And, of course, the prediction for this Saturday. So, everybody lean in, grab your popcorn, sit back, because it's going to be a wild episode. This is the Bama Factor with Alex Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Bama Factor with Alex Taylor. I'm your host, as always, Alex Taylor, here on a beautiful Wednesday evening. Game week, Alabama, Georgia. This is one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game of the season for each of these teams. And, as you look at the intensity and the hype that builds up to this game, ever since 2015, this has been a marquee game. It's had a lot of playoff implications. Some years it's had SEC title attached to it. Other years it's had the national title attached to it. But both of these teams very familiar with each other over the last decade. Alabama owning the series the last 10 times they played with 9 wins and 1 loss. And, when you think of Alabama, Georgia, you have the great rivalries in college football. You've got the game with Ohio State and Michigan. You've got USC, UCLA. You got Texas, Oklahoma. You've got Wisconsin and, Northwestern. You've got, Michigan and Michigan State. You got Clemson, South Carolina, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee. But when you think about Alabama, Georgia, the vibe is just a little bit different. It's just the intensity shifts at that moment. I mean, you got 2 high-level programs, 8 combined, 8 combined championships between the 2 of them in the last 17 years. You're just looking at 2 programs that have really been the standard of the sport. For the better part of a decade, and even longer than that. But again, this game this year feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit more impactful in terms of what it can mean for Alabama's season this year. Obviously, Alabama coming into this Georgia game this season in 2025 a little bit different than they did a year ago. A year ago, they're 3-0 coming into this game. This year, 2-1. There's really no room for error here. And it's on the road. You got a hostile environment. You have a new quarterback. So again, we're just going to jump right into it. So where this really starts is this starts with Ty Simpson going on the road. This starts with his calm, his intensity, his demeanor, his ability to make big plays on the road and really go into a hostile environment, not get shaken by the crowd, not get shaken by the defense of Georgia, but to really control this game and really be that true QB1, really respond to, the pressure that's being put on him. So this is kind of, his first really big road stretch. He's got to go to Missouri in a few weeks. He'll go to South Carolina at the end of October. He's got to go to Auburn at the end of the year. So he's already played on the road once, and he didn't necessarily play bad, but your first road starts out of the way, so you've got that under your belt. And again, these last 2 weeks, he's been very accurate. He's been making great decisions with the ball. And again, not turning the ball over is something huge. I think, when you really look at how he's taking care of the ball, that is, I think that's the most important thing that he's done. When you don't have a turnover prone quarterback, and he's going to have to continue that. He takes care of the ball. He's going to be very successful, but it's a step up for sure from Florida State. Florida State's a hostile environment. They got the war chant every down, but this is 90,000 plus rowdy Georgia fans. The pass rush that Georgia has. That Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart run a very good defensive scheme. They're going to challenge our offensive line. Our offensive line has got to have one of the better games of the year. We've been improving in that aspect over the last couple weeks. But the primary need for Ty here is, don't make this particular moment any bigger than it already is. This is already a huge game. It's already got national championship implications, playoff implications, SEC implications. And, don't think of this as an elimination game. Don't make the moment bigger than it is. But what we need out of Ty Simpson, honestly, and it can be really short here, is you need quick reads, accuracy in the tight throwing windows, and just avoiding turnovers. You need to let Ty Simpson be who he is. He's an athlete, and you need to let him use his skill players. You need to let him trust his skill players are going to go make plays. And again, I have the utmost confidence in Ty there, and he's going to be a big part of this, and that's somebody I'm going to be watching closely this Saturday. But another thing, big news earlier in the week. Alabama getting Jam and Tim Kennan back. Obviously, Jam Miller suffering a collarbone dislocation, some type of shoulder injury before the season started. Was out the first 3 games. Tim Kennan suffering an ankle injury, had tightrope surgery. Both guys practiced this week. I've seen practice footage on both of them. They look great. And, what does their return really mean for Alabama? And what I think it does, I think it shifts Alabama's identity back to where it needs to be. Not saying that the last 2 weeks these guys haven't stepped up and they haven't been getting back to the identity. I think they have. But adding Tim Kennan back, this is a little bit of a hot take. I think Tim Kennan is the heart and soul of the defense. I think he's the heart and soul of the team. I think he's a guy, who came in, in-state guy, and, he is a guy who bleeds crimson. I mean, year in and year out. And, this guy came in, 4-string defensive tackle, a little bit overweight, had to drop some of the weight to be able to play at Alabama. And, look at him, he's turned into a monster, turned into one of Alabama's best defensive tackles and, really huge in the run support game. He's that anchor of that line. And I think that's huge. And, again, it's just he's going to help against that Georgia run offense. He's going to give, some pass rush from the inside. And then switching over to Jam, Jam just brings that extra juice. He just brings that extra gear. Had a really good game against Georgia a year ago, was really successful out of the backfield. Jam just runs hard, and Jam's got some underrated speed. And I think Jam is, Ty Simpson alluded to him practicing earlier this week, and he practiced like a wild man. In the to quote our quarterback. So I know he's ready to get back, and he kind of helps balance the run and the pass. He's a great pass blocker as well, so he can give Ty time. Really good in the screen game, and just again runs hard, hits holes well, and just I think having these 2 guys back, it's a big thing for your team. 2 veteran leadership type guys that can really add a lot of intensity to you, especially in a hostile environment like Athens. So now kind of switching to that, going to who could be the X factors. And, obviously, the first X factor that comes to mind is Ryan Williams. Kind of broke out against Wisconsin, after going out with a concussion against Florida State. Didn't play the second game, but really comes out, has his first 100-yard performance and his first touchdown since, late last season. And I think that did a lot for his confidence. And then you have the off week to kind of get yourself fully healed. And then, but, this was the game last year that Ryan Williams really put the world on notice. And, he had a really good first game last year and, second and third. But Georgia's where he just really put everybody on notice. And obviously we know how that game ended last season, with his 75-yard touchdown that is forever etched in Crimson Tide history. But again, he provides that speed, that separation, and big play potential. I also think that you cannot exclude, Jeremy Bernard. the offenses seem to run through him this year. And, I think that needs to continue. I think he's really is the catalyst of this offense. I think, with just how he's performing this year, his leadership, his ability to get open. And again, Ryan kind of takes some of the attention away from Jeremy. So, I mean, Ryan's actually doing a pretty good job of being a decoy, and they can't do that for long. And I just think it's absolutely incredible. I think when you uh, kind of switch to the defense, I think some of the X factors, on the defense, could for sure be, first one that comes to my mind is Justin Jefferson, inside linebacker playing right by, of course, on the other side of Lawson. And, Justin Jefferson's just good sideline to sideline speed, that sixth year type of guy. I mean, just has a lot of football experience, has played a lot of ball, played a lot of snaps, and now is moving into a bigger role this year and, plays with a very aggressive mentality, very physical guy, fills the holes well, gaps well. That's what we're going to have against Georgia. We're going to have to tackle well. We're going to have to be more physical than them. It's going to be a physical game. And I think Justin Jefferson is one of those guys. I also think another X factor that you could potentially see here, I think Bray Hubbard is one as well. I think Hubbard is a guy who, has really come on, these last two games, really kind of answered that call, from being called out after the first week of his effort, and, earned Defensive Player of the Week against his performance against Wisconsin. So, I mean, when you really look at, how he's responding, I think Bray Hubbard's going to be a huge asset in this game. And, he's going to be really big in, supporting the run. And, he comes and he flies like, a bat out of, where. When he's coming downhill, he's just a very, very aggressive guy. And we know how he can play. And, we know the intensity he brings. And I want to switch to one more person on the offensive side. I think, a lot of the attention is going to go towards Ryan and Jeremy, but I think two guys that can really be a good X factor against Georgia is Isaiah Horton and Lottie Brooks. I think this is the time because if you really go back, look at true freshman wide receivers that have had success against Georgia that really just came to play. Julio Jones, 2008, had a lot of success. Then you go to 2012, Amari Cooper, SEC championship game, had a lot of success. Calvin Ridley, 2015, caught a touchdown, had some really long plays. Then you go to 2017, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy made some good plays in the championship game. You go to 2018, Jalen Waddle. 2020 really didn't have them, but then, you look at just 2023, Isaiah Bond, he was one of them. And, so those younger receivers just kind of have, that kind of the knack, for performing well in this game. And I think you've got to feed the ball to Brooks because there's going to be a lot of attention on 2 and 5. And Isaiah Horton at 6'4" presents a matchup nightmare for whoever he really goes up against. And if he gets on a linebacker, if any of our guys get on a linebacker, I have the confidence in our guys that we can win that battle. But again, short control passing game, I think, you kind of make them respect that. You get them to play underneath at that point. And, Georgia's kind of been, these last couple of years, has kind of adopted, kind of given some cushion and kind of giving up the underneath stuff and just trying to tackle well. That's where Alabama really made, that was their bread and butter in this game a year ago. Alabama was just, slicing and dicing all the way down the field. And then, they were putting together, these 9, 10, 12 play drives that, resulted in touchdowns. But overall, I think X factors just, two, obviously just a couple there, but I think Brooks is going to be huge. I think you need to feed him the ball. And now really kind of where I think this game is going to be won. I've been talking about it since last week. I've been talking about it all this week. It's the trenches battle. I mean, Alabama's offensive line, we've heard they've been rotating some other guys. My personal opinion, who it needs to be from left tackle to right tackle, it needs to be Caden Proctor, Cam Dewberry, Parker Brailsford, Jaden Roberts, and Michael Carroll. I think Carroll brings the extra physicality, and do not be surprised if you see on the first offensive possession, if you see Carroll out there. I just think Carroll brings that extra physicality. I think he complements Roberts extremely well. Roberts is great in the run game. He just opens up gaps. Carroll plays with that edge. I mean, 5-star out of IMG Academy, just really big body, really good tackles. Going to be a really good player for Alabama. Future first-round draft pick in my opinion. But it's going to come down to those. It's going to come down to those 5 right there. And I think Proctor had a little rocky start to the season, still kind of having rocky series here and there. I think this is a game where he really needs to step up. This was a game last year where he really stepped up. And, really, there was not a lot of backside pressure on Milroe last year. And, Proctor really stepped up at this point last year. So, Georgia's got, Christian Miller on the inside. They got McLeod and Nasir Johnson on the inside. So, and, you can't really look past, Braylon Wilson, Gabe Harris, C.J. Allen. I mean, those guys, these are the guys that are going to be coming after that offensive line. And, they got, some really good headhunters on that Georgia defense. So the offensive line is going to have to be really up against that. And then switching sides, in the trenches, Alabama's defensive front, they had 12 tackles for a loss against Louisiana Monroe, but they didn't register a sack. And finally, last week, they get 7 or 8 tackles for a loss, and they get 4 sacks. So kind of broke through in that barrier right there. But Alabama's got to get more. It's got to be consistent pressure. It's got to be winning at the line of scrimmage, because if Georgia wins the line of scrimmage and the run game absolutely falters for Alabama, then it could be a long night. Because Georgia can drop back, rush 4, drop 7, rush 3, drop 8, and, they can force us to beat them downfield. If our defensive front gets pushed around and Georgia's able to establish that run and they're able to use Gunnar Stockton in a way where they can use his legs, it could be a long night. So we've got to be physical at the point of attack. We've got to make sure that we can dominate that. And if our offensive line holds up, give Simpson some time, our wide receivers are good enough to get open. And I think Simpson can create at that point. I will say the one really piece of kryptonite for Georgia's defense is they over pursue. And that's not something that, I was really accustomed to seeing from Georgia. But, in these last couple of years, Georgia almost gets too aggressive. Sometimes, they over pursue, they outrun their coverage, they overrun some of their defenders, they run past the tackler, run past the ball carrier. So, but, again, they do play with an edge, and I think Alabama plays with an edge as well. That's why this is going to be such a good game. So, but overall, the trenches, it's going to come down to that. Just watch which offensive line controls this game and which defensive line is able to kind of make it go. Because if you make the defensive line bend to the submission of the offensive line, then, it's going to be, a long night for both of them. And, it could be that really Georgia's O-line, Alabama's O-line does extremely well. And then it's just going to have to see who can run the ball better and which backs can hit the holes better and which can rip off a big play. Or it may be that both offensive lines don't play well, and the defensive lines are making it extremely hard to run, and it's going to see which quarterback is more accurate and which quarterback can make more plays at that point. So, again, it could be that both don't play well in certain areas at the same time, and then that's when you have a game at that point. So now, just sticking with the defense, kind of going to that segment, what Alabama's got to do from a defensive standpoint, and I don't have to speak too much on offense. I've kind of already alluded to what we should do on offense, but on the defense, Alabama's defense kind of getting scrutinized, for their play at Florida State, scrutinized at times last year as well. But this was a game last year that the Alabama defense really can play. Forced 4 turnovers, kind of let their foot off the gas in the second half, let Georgia come back. But the first thing is that we have to have pressure from multiple spots. But you can't be too aggressive. You can't give up big plays. You can't let your eyes get you in trouble, because that's one of the downfalls of the 4-2-5 is that it's eyes to the quarterback, and sometimes those eyes can get you in trouble. And sometimes you are susceptible to the big play. And, they have guys like Dylan Bell and Zachariah Branch, Colby Young. They've got guys who can take the top off of a defense, especially Branch. Branch is very elusive. He's a good athlete. He's extremely electric. So you've got to make sure that you get you know I the my opinion the eye discipline is huge. Um, that's going to be the biggest. That's going to be the biggest thing for Alabama. You have to limit explosive plays, and that kind of goes back. Chunk runs, any of the banks, any of the deep shots. I mean, those 50-50 balls we've got to go up and contest. And I know we have the DBs that do it. And, I want to see Sab and Bray kind of lurking. I kind of want to see Xavier Mincy get in to the mix and, just really create some turnovers because that's what rattled Carson Beck a year ago. And I think, you can rattle Stockton in this game, force them into some turnovers. I mean, force them to make some uncharacteristic choices and just play aggressive. We got to get off the field on third down. That's another huge thing. Like our third down defense has to stand tall. Like we can't let them hurting. Georgia last week, I don't think they were great on third down last week. I would have to look at the numbers, but in this game last year, halfway through the third quarter, they were 0 for 10 at one point, or like 0 for 9, I think, or maybe 1 for 10 or something like that. So Alabama did a good job on third down a year ago, but they were 5 for 5 on fourth down. So again, we've got to hold up. We've got to force Georgia into long drives, and again, keep their defense on the field. And if we do give up long drives, it needs to be a bend but don't break type of defense. We need to at least hold them to 3, or potentially push them out of the range where they still burn a lot of clock, and they wasted all that time, and then boom, you got to put your defense back on all. And again, turnovers and field position, we got to take advantage of any of the mistakes. Having good field position, we've got to capitalize on that. We've got to make sure we capitalize on that. So again, key players for this game, for Alabama, Ty Simpson, first one for sure. Having Jam and Tim Keenan back are huge. Ryan Williams, I think tight ends are going to play a big point in this game. Caleb Edwards, Josh Cuevas, I think they can kind of be those easy little passes, those curl routes, those little mesh routes, crossing patterns. I think you're going to utilize those guys a lot. And also just in the blocking game, run blocking, I think you need to utilize those guys as well. And then as far as the defense, I think guys like Justin Jefferson, Keon Sabb. I think LT Overton is due for a big game. I would love to see Keon Keeley getting there. James Smith, I think, is having an extremely great season so far. I think he needs to just really have his day as well. I think Quay Russaw is going to be a guy to watch, and I'm really excited to see how this defense comes out intensity-wise, and just from seeing the team this week, and it seems like they're the intensity's there, preparation is there. They're ready to go prove something, and earlier today, Deontay Lawson said, we're all we got and we're all we need. And, just that they're adopting that mentality, the Alabama against the world type of mentality. And that's really what it is. I mean, you've seen Josh Pate, and one of my favorites, shout out to Josh Pate, Pate State. But, he picked Georgia. I would not be surprised if the majority of the college game day analysts picked Georgia. I know probably, several other guys are going to pick Georgia, and 88% of the money line is on Georgia. That kind of leads into our last one of the prediction. So Alabama, Georgia, Saturday night, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central. In between the hedges, potential blackout on the horizon. Alabama comes in at number 17. Georgia comes in at number 4. Man, doesn't get any better than this. Two unproven, but yet very hot quarterbacks for right now. Two very good defenses. A lot of electric players on each side. A lot of future NFL players on both sides. Two good coaches. Hostile environment. I'll give two predictions. It goes two ways. Everything I've talked about in this episode, Alabama does what they need to do. Control what they can control. Control the pace of the game. Make Georgia play to beat them. Don't beat yourselves. Don't shoot yourself in the foot with turnovers. If we do that, I could see an Alabama 27-20 game, 27-24 type game. We don't control the trenches. Give up some big plays and we shoot ourselves in the foot. Georgia could easily win this game, 34-17, 34-14. But do I think our offense is better than 14 points? Yes. But overall, my final score prediction, I'm going to give Alabama the win in hostile territory. I'm going to go 31-27 Alabama scores late for the Ty Simpson legacy drive. And I think Alabama can come away with a win in Athens. Guys, thank you so much for joining tonight. Again, it's going to be a great football Saturday. You got Ohio State playing Washington. You got Penn State and Oregon. You got LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, Texas A&M, um, Arizona State, TCU, Alabama, Georgia. Of course, you've got a lot of really good matchups this weekend. So enjoy the college football Saturday. I'm gonna be at the beach, starting my family vacation, so gonna get to watch it with my dad. Gonna have my mom and my wife and my son there. We're gonna be at the beach for a week, get a little perfect vacation in. I would love nothing better than to start it off the right way with a win in Athens. But if you're traveling to Athens, be careful. I wish everybody, safe travels, a good weekend. Um, and thank you guys so much for the support on the channel. Be sure to follow me on Instagram, X, and TikTok at the.bama.factor. Closing in on 27K on Instagram, growing the YouTube channel as well. Subscribe here on YouTube, The Bama Factor with Alex Taylor. You can find all previous episodes here, any other hype videos, or any other type of content that you want. And again, Saturday night, in Between the Hedges, it's going to be a war. Hopefully the Tide comes out on top, and we'll be back here next week live from the beach, Orange Beach, Alabama, with the recap of this game and the preview of the Alabama and the Vanderbilt game back in Bryant-Denny Stadium next Saturday, October the 4th. As always, this is the Bama Factor with Alex Taylor. Good night, God bless, and roll Tide.